An idea comes, and you see it, and you hear it, and you know it.
Creativity is not a talent. It is not a talent. It is a way of operating.
It comes like on a TV in your mind.
I think you can be successful without having failures.
Really, it's good to have a mind of a child. You want to look at the world like you've never seen it before.
Whatever you're doing, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.
I don't think I create anything. I'm really serious. I discover the ideas.
Where do ideas come from? Well, they come from your experiences and what you observe or what you experience in your own insight, and then maybe paying attention to also the insight of others.
Creativity is not an ability that you either have or do not have.
Don't try to be original, just try to be good. What it really means is being good is damn difficult.
Hello, everybody. How are you today? Good. All right, I'm extremely excited to be here with you today. So let's get started. All right, so creativity, it truly is a magical thing. I mean, to some extent, it's almost like hard to explain. And it is about to become one of the most important abilities that we can actually have in the workforce. In a world where machine learning and, again, artificial intelligence seems to be about to take our jobs, creativity will be the one thing that is only unique to us as humans. And it better works, honestly. I mean, it's estimated that by 2030, only in the US, 36 million workers will lose their job to artificial intelligence. And you could think about, the first probably that will be affected will be transportation of the self-driving cars, chain workers, and so on. But if you find yourself not challenged during or at your job, chances are you might be next. So that's a good way to start. Everybody's scared now? All right, so creativity and creative, is this one word that we use a lot, especially in the service industry, right? Sometimes we use it to describe a whole department. Sometimes we use it to evaluate their work. Some people even have a creative director title. Our industry really celebrates creativity, but in general, shops do really little to actually get deeper into the processes and the training that takes to enhance creativity and increase the performance of your brain. Ultimately, it's left to individuals, to each person, to figure out how to do it on their own. So what I want to go through in this talk is 4 things that I believe are really important to actually enhance your creativity and to some extent get better at what you do. What I'm hoping is at the end of this 20 to 30 minutes talk, you will have learned or relearned all ways to approach challenges that might make you ultimately better at what you do. So let's get started with the most basic thing, like what is creativity? Creativity is a fundamental activity of information processing, which again sounds pretty dry. There are 2 ways to look at it. It's the capacity or the ability to produce work that is to some extent new and innovative and original and unexpected. And the second one is, it also is the capacity to produce work that is appropriate, that answers a brief, that feels like the right answer to a set of constraints that have been given normally, by a project assignment. Creativity is an ability. It's the ability to generate new ideas by combining, connecting, and ultimately reapplying, existing ideas. Maria Popova describes creativity as combinatorial, and that means that everything is, in some ways, built on what came before. Creativity is ultimately the ability that allows you to see those connections between, those, moments in history that otherwise would go unnoticed. It's not a talent. It is an ability you can train and get better at. It is also an attitude. It's the attitude that actually allows you to enjoy the reality while still always keeping an eye to ways to improve it. It's not the fact that you're not happy with the surroundings. It's the fact that you always double question basically what otherwise other people will take as that's the way it is. And ultimately, creativity is also a process. Creative work comes from hard work, and if you've been given this opportunity, you might know. And that work is what gives you the ability to see those connections. There's this myth of, the spark of brilliance. It doesn't normally happen. You either do the work consciously or you do it unconsciously because you've been doing it for so long. So there are many ways to break down this notion of creativity and many ways to represent it visually. I like this formula by Ruth Noller. She says that creativity is a function of knowledge, which is ultimately obtained through your life experiences, imagination, which is your ability to make and find those connections, and finally, this notion of evaluation. So I want to use that structure to actually talk a little bit myself and introduce myself to you guys. I've always considered myself a creative person. Not a great creative, but a creative. I was born in Spain back in the 80s, right? And for the first 12 years of my life, we had no computers or no internet. We basically play with sticks and rocks, just like that guy right there. Summers were really, really long and boring, so I got myself into anime and manga and things like Dragon Ball Z. This made a big splash in my life, especially early on. I think I'm going to regret that picture. I watched things like Saint Seiya, Ranma. This is part of my childhood. Captain Tsubasa, of course. Lots of different things that totally influence my work today. When I was 12 years old, I watched Akira for the first time, and I thought, what was that? That's some crazy thing to see when you're 12 years old. But I loved it. It was really good. I learned how to use a PC by breaking PCs. I've broken so many PCs at home that my family doesn't even trust me to set up their email, which I'm okay with. I came to design out of boredom, but I stayed the first time I actually saw somebody using something I created. Now, fast forward 16 years. There are two things I love about design that I care about deeply. First is the ability to create something that is visually stunning, a button you want to lick, a layout you want to print. And second is seeing how actually people use what I do on their daily lives. During my time at Microsoft, I actually tried to combine both. I was part of the Fluent Design team that actually tried to answer how could we leverage the idea of natural user interfaces by designing an OS or modifying an OS that everybody has been using for the past almost 30 years. We look at materials. We look at how visual hierarchy comes into play through different materials in the real world and what that could mean in a 3D environment as well, and what that could mean using, again, a metaphor that has been there for the last 25 years. We look at applying these same concepts to, what is the iconic background of Windows 10? How could we apply this notion of materials to something that, again, hasn't changed in a few years at this point? Besides that, again, I've helped other companies beyond Microsoft try to figure out similar and distant problems. Like, for example, seeing how someone's profile could be visualized online in a VR environment, or who could actually, the way you would actually talk to that person. I look into imagining ways in which you could receive a phone call in VR. And I love in general playing with new form factors, regardless if they already exist or they're pure, again, vision pieces. Today, I lead the design department at Huge in Oakland, as I mentioned before. Again, and these are some of the beautiful individuals that I work with. And we do a lot of different work, but it's basically structured in three categories: product design, campaign, as in advertising, and then places and spaces, which is more physical, experiential design. So hopefully that gives you a sense of knowledge and imagination. When it comes to positive attitude, this is one of the things that you need to also be creative. And just to make a point, I'm probably the most optimistic person in this room. I mean, I'm so optimistic. My first domain was whydon'twetry.com. And I still own it. It hasn't really all worked, but it's still there. And finally, evaluation might not be my strongest suit. I ignored the creative of Vine before Vine came out for 3 months, and I totally regret it afterwards. So do not trust me if I tell you your idea is not good. So as I said before, I always consider myself a creative person, and that's why I'm really familiar with what I'm going to tell you next. I want to talk about the myths of creativity. This is ultimately what you tell yourself when you're trying to come up with an idea, but you can't. There are three that I want to call out that I think are really interesting. The first one is there's only one solution. There's only one solution to a given problem, and not only that, it already exists. This is, it cannot be more historically inaccurate There definitely one solution that might work the best, and maybe it exists, I don't know, but there are many, many solutions to any given problem. Think about Gutenberg, creating the first printer and thinking that is it. Now we can communicate, with others we create books, and that's the ultimate form factor. By any means, there's many more solutions to a problem that we can think about. The second one, I wasn't born creative. I'm not creative. You have to be born creative. This is a notion that came to life from the times of the Renaissance. It was like Michelangelo's agent who started putting this concept out there of his powers being given by God or somehow divine. It is, of course, not true. Creativity is an ability. You can train this ability, and is by no means reserved to a few. The final one, this might be the most painful one. Creativity doesn't lead to anyone being happy. Honestly, it doesn't lead to success or happiness. It's an arduous path. It's full of missteps. It's full of frustrations. I love this quote. This is Hans Zimmer. This is the composer of soundtracks like Interstellar, Inception, Superman, all the Christopher Nolan's movies. He said, after all these years, I come to realize that I must go through a period of agony and torture before I have a breakthrough, it's pretty depressing. But again, his work is amazing. The way Tinker Hatfield says it, he is the chief design officer at Nike. He talks about creativity as a disease. He's like, he misses half of the scenery when he's traveling because he's always looking at people's feet. So I like the way Milton Glaser talks about it. Creativity is a journey, and the ideas are the reward. If you want to become a millionaire, there are probably shorter ways to become that person. Creativity might not be one of them. So now that we have that, let's talk a little bit about the conditions and get a bit more actionable. What is it that you have to do in your environment to become creative or allow yourself to have a creative approach to a given problem? The first thing that you need, and this came from John Cleese, is space. You cannot become playful and therefore creative if you are under your usual pressures. And if you're like any normal person, when you actually sit down and try to think about an idea, your mind will go towards the email that you have to send, that comment on Slack that you didn't respond to. You go to Instagram, you will check your Twitter. You will go to TikTok and lose 25 minutes there. You will think about all those things that you haven't done and you should be doing instead. But you need to basically be able to go through that moment, create space to be creative beyond your usual pressures. There's nothing more distracting to, space than interruptions, and it happens a lot. Interruptions amount for every time you get interrupted. Apparently, it takes up to 25 minutes to get back to your flow. And the reality of interruptions is most of them are self-inflicted. So, just think about this. Only in the US, people check their phone 52 times a day. Multiply 52 times 25. That's a long time. Every single day you're distracted. And I don't want everybody to think about this as a new technology problem. This is as old as humanity. So let me tell you a story. The year is 1505, so 16th century. This is the Pope Julius II. He commissioned Michelangelo to build his tomb, this one, in Rome. Apparently, the Pope was such a micromanager, and he interrupted Michelangelo so much that Michelangelo left the city, and he sent a letter. And he said, if I stay in Rome, my own tomb will be made before the Pope's. Which, this is a long time ago. And then he makes the case for almost remote work. He said, he shouldn't be bothered about where I work on it, provided that at the end of 5 years we agreed on, it is set up in St. Peter's. And that is something beautiful, as I've promised it will be. Interruptions are a big enemy to creativity. Second one, it's not enough to create space. You need to create time. You need to create space for a period of time. I like to think about time in 3 different chunks. You need time to disconnect from your reality. Again, what I described before, the emails you have to send, the discussion you need to have, all of those. Then you need to allow yourself some time to have bad ideas. I embrace this part of the process because I tend to write all the bad ideas that I have one after another until I get them out of my system. Do not try to fight them. Just get them out to make space for the new ideas to come in. And that will lead you to ultimately the third chunk, which is, after you have disconnected yourself from your reality and you got all the ideas out of the way, now is when you can actually let yourself be created without fearing your own demons and the fact that your indecision or time being a struggle. Confidence. Nothing will stop you from being creative other than not the fear of making a mistake, not being confident enough. This sounds a little bit like a Disney movie, right? You have to believe you're creative in order to be creative. There are few things in life you can believe and become. You could believe you're a millionaire, but if you're not, you're not. That doesn't work that way, right? But creativity, it's one of those that without you believing you can do it, it's just not going to happen. Another one, good company. Find yourself a friend that you can actually talk to, someone that will not refute or invalidate your ideas, but will build up on what you're saying and will take them somewhere else. Good company ultimately is a multiplier of creativity if, again, you're talking to the right person. There's this study by the researcher Steven Johnson. He says that the most creative time periods in history were those where artists, creatives, whatever, engineers had a forum where they could share their ideas with others. And this has been proven true historically. The myth of isolation is just that. It's a myth. Another one, humor. Humor is obviously one of the most important things you can have in life, and ultimately what will get you from a convergent way of thinking to a divergent way of thinking, from what John Cleese called the closed mode to the open mode of your brain. It is extremely important. I really like this quote from one of my favorite designers. He says, being a designer is not stressful at all. His name is Mark, and he is 22 years old. I wasn't sure if that was going to land, so I'm happy it did. Last one, the ability to forget. I've worked with a lot of people that have a lot of experience, and experience is amazing because, in some extent, it's going to help you, not fall into the same mistakes you might have the risk to fall before, right? The reality of our business is that we're in the business of creating constructs. We create these ideas and we send them to the world. Some of them fail, and some of them, they succeed. But that continuous test and iteration might actually cause, some people to become expert, but really to become jaded individuals, people that cannot approach challenges in a fresh way. I bring this, in my work every single day. And I always find myself in the concept or constructs of a brainstorm, having to tell this to people. When someone becomes naturally the person that says no to something, I say, don't tell me why this idea won't work, just tell me what will happen if it does. Duncan Wardle, which is the former head of innovation at Disney, he talks about the idea of naive expert. He basically brings non-experts or experts in a different category to brainstorm sessions. And what comes out of those sessions is that these people bring this naive approach to it, where they will ask provocative questions that experts might think they are given, yet they unravel new paths to becoming creative or approach a problem in a different way. So just like Paul Scher said, you can't be successful without having failures. Success doesn't lead you anywhere. Success will only lead you to repetition, which is, by definition, failing to be creative. All right, we're getting there. The biggest enemy of creativity is inspiration. We are surrounded by it. It's crazy. It's never been easier than it is right now to actually see what gazillion other people are doing, what word they're putting online on Dribbble, what are they putting on Twitter, what teas did they release, and now you're like, oh my God, now I'm thinking about what this other person is working on. In my opinion, it might seem counterintuitive, but I believe inspiration is a hack. It's nothing more than a hack to shortcut the experiences that you should have acquired by yourself to become creative in your job. Just like any other life hack, it's not a bad hack, but it's inevitable, probably at a certain stage of your career, but eventually you have to let it go. You have to let it go and start adding your own flavor to your own work. I say this quite often at work. I said, inspiration is like sugar. A little bit will give you a kick, but if you get too much, you'll become sick and ultimately unmotivated. And this is ultimately, like, the more things you see, you'll feel like a deer caught in the headlights of a car. You'll be unable to be creative, and therefore will fall into one of the myths of creativity, which is everything has been created, which is false. And again, we need to admit that there's a lot of inspiration, everything is a remix, but we need to look beyond our field. You could look at the planet, beautiful place where we live. This is an example of a friend. I created with a friend, Tim Holman, this website, this project called the Pattern Library many years ago. And basically, I asked a bunch of friends to create a pattern for me and put it out there for people to use. He created this pattern inspired by Russian Persian tattoos. I mean, how crazy is that? But again, he went so far in the inspiration that created something unique and something that you can clearly see you wouldn't be able to find, in the popular page of Dribbble or any other, social network out there. I didn't do it as much, but I did a similar pattern that, it was based in these Ecuadorian patterns. And, I put it out there free, and the fact that to some extent or to some people felt novel ended up actually, making this pattern used in a bunch of different places. Hideous, in my opinion, but, that's that. Shoes, we had this, coffee brand that distributed this coffee all over Europe, or even the backdrop of this coffee shop in Russia. The more and further you look for your inspiration, or your references, the further your creations will go. I call this the rubber band effect of inspiration. Steve Jobs, Susan Kare, many other creatives said, you can only draw a line forward by looking to the dots backwards, right? You need to connect the dots looking back. So if the dots you're looking for live within your category, and they're pretty much what everybody's doing, your work would only be a small build-up that, on what already exists. If you go a little bit further back, within your discipline, your work suddenly will become more meaningful. You will start asking the right questions. It will become way more interesting. And this is, the more you go back, the more it goes forward. If ultimately, again, you look at adjacent industries, similar fields, you look at the market, you look at what things are driving certain solutions, and you look at what those solutions are in completely different industries, you might be able to escape the obvious solution and do something that becomes much more meaningful. The further back you look for dots, and the more you experience yourself, the better your work will become. All right, so I want to wrap it up with a few creative techniques that I found were really interesting. The first one is drugs. Do drugs, legal drugs. No, I'm just joking. I don't drink coffee, so just imagine my mornings are slow. There is a world of creative techniques out there, right? And everybody has their own trick, really. There's one that I thought really interesting I wanted to share with you today. Is the one that Dali, one of the greatest artists of our time, used, and Thomas Edison used as well. He's the person with more patents in the US to this day, which is crazy. This technique is called hypnagogia. And the idea here is that hypnagogia is the experience of the transitional state between being awake and being asleep. It's this state of consciousness, right, that you can only reach out when you're in the onset of falling asleep. And it includes this lucid thought, lucid dreaming, hallucination, and sleep paralysis. So what Dali used to do, and I found this mind-blowing, he will basically go on a comfortable chair, he will grab one spoon with his thumb and his forefinger and put a plate underneath his hand. He will stay in the chair thinking about the problem until he will fall asleep. Right at the moment he will fall asleep, the spoon will fall, it will make a noise, and it will wake him up. He will wake up, he will run, and he will either paint or write whatever he was thinking about. And I encourage you to try it, and just let's look at Dali's dreams. They're a little bit crazy. So I don't even dare to explain what's going on in this one. But it's interesting that it doesn't take that long to actually, that much effort to explore other parts of your subconscious mind. So with that said, there are many, hundreds of creative techniques out there. And these are things that you can either apply to yourself when you're trying to come up with an idea, or you can actually bring, to a group. From lateral thinking to body storming to gazillion. There are so many. But what I would like to share with you now is a 5 single-step technique that was enunciated first in the 1940s. So this was created by James Webb Young. He wrote this in, again, 1940s, and 80 years later still remains relevant. And it might actually sound to you in some ways simple, but it is on the sequence, on the thoroughness of the steps where actually this becomes useful and valid and somehow leads to some result. So James Webb Young, he worked in advertising, but again, this technique has been used in all sorts of disciplines. It's based on two principles, and that's him right there. It's based on two principles. The first one is ideas are new combinations. An idea is nothing more or less than a new combination of all elements. And the second one is the ability to make new combinations is enhanced by the ability to see those relationships. With that said, there are 5 steps that are part of this process: gathering raw material, mental digestive process, unconscious processing, the aha moment, and idea meets reality. Let's talk a little bit of the first one. Gathering raw material is extremely simple as you try to understand what it is, but it's the one step that we always tend to skip. We always start gathering materials, and all of a sudden we jump to ideation. It's inevitable because our brain doesn't enjoy this activity necessarily to quickly jump to the last step and try to enunciate ways to solve the problem. The reality is that the longer you stay here, the deeper the knowledge around your specific subject that you will acquire. What I do here is and the recommendation, even on a digital era, is find a way to store this knowledge. It could be tiny Post-its, it could be cards. Surround yourself by everything that you are learning about specific subject matter. Think about strategy. We normally don't talk about strategy in these kind of conferences, but what have you learned from the market? What have you learned from the competitors? What are the insights from the user? What is your client's competitive advantage in a specific or given a given problem? Learn all that in order to actually gather as much material as you can. The more you gather, the more dots you gather, the better the ideas will become at the end. Second one, digesting the material. This is a really conscious, brainy activity. Again, you need to start looking at everything that you've captured, acknowledging that ideas are just a combination of all elements, and start combining them in different ways. You could think about the kaleidoscope as a way to think about this, in which a single image or combination of images can actually become infinite executions of that same solution. The third step is what's called unconscious processing. This is the moment where you drop it. This is the moment where you learn so much, you know so much about the subject matter that you can allow yourself to stop thinking about it. Go to the movies, do something else. Conan Doyle, which is the author of Sherlock Holmes, in the novels of Sherlock Holmes, sometimes Sherlock will actually, in the middle of a case, he will take his sidekick, like Watson, to the theater. And it was always like a clash to his sidekick because he was a really rational mind. But Conan Doyle, the author of the book, actually understood the creative process. You have to think a lot about the problem and then let your mind get distracted by other things once you know everything that you can know about it. And chances are, if you've done all these steps, you will reach out the fourth one, which is the aha moment. The magical moment, absolutely unexpected. You wouldn't see this one coming, where an idea might actually come to your mind. It might be while taking a shower. It might be it happens to me when I go to bed. When I go to bed, I have the best ideas of the world. I take my phone, I message myself, and I just hope the next day they still hold up. That takes me to the next step, which is ideas, idea meets reality. This is the moment where that thing you thought was a really, really good idea needs to get out. You need to socialize it. You need to share it with other people and see if it holds up. The recommendation here is, and I tell this always to the team I work with, you need to be passionate about your ideas. You need to be able to defend them, up to a point where, it becomes a little bit obsessive. But you also have to be able to let them go. If, by being able to evaluate your own ideas, you get enough proof to refute that idea or understand that it's not valid anymore. So this is probably the moment where most ideas die. But at the same time, the ones you get, and there might not be that many, will probably become really strong. So again, these 4 simple steps, again, are not challenging, I would say, from a mathematical point of view, but it's only the thoroughness of the sequence that will make them valid. Okay, so we're out of time. We've talked about the myths, then conditions, enemies, and technique. I just have 3 more thoughts that I want to leave you with before I wrap it up. The first one, create an environment where creativity can happen. And this is true at home, this is true at work. If you're a manager, you need to create space where people feel, trusted and empowered to make mistakes and ideas. Create dots for yourself. Again, experiences are, think about inspiration as a hack. You can definitely get a taste of it, but you need to make sure and the ideas feel authentic to you. You want to get to a certain age and feel like you're leaving a legacy, not necessarily you're remixing some other people's ideas. And finally, creativity is not talent. Trust the process. I'll leave you with this quote that I love. It says, "Success is the ability to go from failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm." This feels really true to me. I hope it does to you as well. Thank you so much. Thanks.